blockchain technology as a weapon in the fight against hunger. It is happening in a hot, dusty refugee camp in Jordan. This technology is in place to do something good for people who need it. Ladies and gentlemen, our next guests. From the World Food Programme, Robert Opp.
Well, good morning, everybody. Morning. Well, what a pleasure to be here, and what an extraordinary ecosystem this is developing here in the Netherlands. It's incredible to see this kind of gathering with the patronage of the royal family, with the intense interest of all the people here. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be here with you and share a little bit of the work that we're doing at the United Nations World Food Programme. I have the honor of serving as the head of innovation and change for the United Nations World Food Programme. And I just need to find the clicker here. Title of my presentation is Can Blockchain End Hunger? You might, or can blockchain help to end hunger? You might guess what my answer to that will be. But I want to start my presentation with another question, which is why am I here? And I'm not talking about, why am I here on planet Earth? Why are any of us here? It's not an existential question of the universe. It's why am I here with you? I'm not a blockchain expert. I'm not a software engineer. But I am somebody intensely interested in how a technology like blockchain can actually help to end one of humanity's most pervasive, most tragic problems. And that's global hunger. And what is the problem of global hunger? Well, 1 in 9 of us on the world, on this planet, are suffering from hunger. Hunger costs the world trillions of dollars in lost productivity, but even worse than that, the lost potential of children who grow up in hunger, the lost potential of men and women who are affected by hunger. That is really the tragedy. And we have to ask ourselves in 2017 why we are still dealing with this problem. There is some good news. Over the last couple decades, the world has actually made progress against hunger. In 1990, we had 1 billion hungry people. Despite population growth, that dropped to 795 million in 2015. A bit of bad news, though, is that recently we've had a little bit of an upturn in hunger again. The last 2-year period, the statistics just came out, published by the United Nations, saying that we actually have 815 million people who are hungry in the world today. And that's a huge problem, obviously. So it means that we're going to have to work even harder to reverse that trend. Now, hunger, I'm sure most of you have a sense of where hunger comes from, but the one obvious reason for hunger is natural disaster. So we saw the hurricanes go through the Caribbean recently, displacing people, disrupting livelihoods, causing hunger. And of course, and of course, I'm sure you also are aware of the situation we have in the world's displaced persons. We are at the highest level of displaced people in the world since World War II. There's about 60 million people who have been displaced from their homes, largely because of conflict. So this is a picture from Jordan refugee camp. There are 5 million Syrians living outside the borders of Syria in the immediate region. That's been going on since 2011. More recently, I'm sure you're watching the news, you see there's about 500,000 Rohingya ethnic minorities who fled Myanmar across the border to Bangladesh. And now we're providing them food assistance. But actually, the majority of those 800 million people who are hungry come from a chronic situation of not having enough to eat, largely due to poverty or other circumstances over a long period of time. And so when you're hungry in a short period of time, that's something we call acute hunger, and you start, if your body doesn't eat enough, you start to have something called wasting. Your muscles start to diminish and things like that, but that can be reversed. But when you grow up without enough adequate nutrition, and that means vitamins and minerals as well, it actually does something much worse. It stunts your growth forever. You cannot reverse it. And it stunts your mental development as well. This is a picture of children in an indigenous village in Guatemala. They're standing next to the World Health Organization's benchmark for healthy 9-year-olds in terms of height, and you can see how short they are. And they will never recover from that. So it's a generation of people who are diminished because of hunger. And that is really the tragedy. And that's also why the member states of the United Nations, all 193 of them, came together in September of 2015, and they approved the global goals. There's 17 global goals, one of which is ending hunger by 2030. And that is really the driving force behind the mandate of the World Food Programme. And the United Nations World Food Programme, just to give you an introduction to us, we are the Food Assistance Agency of the United Nations. One of the larger agencies. We're present across 80 countries worldwide. We reach between 80 and 100 million people with some form of food assistance every year. And we have a massive supply chain. The supply chain has, at any given day, we have 5,000 trucks, 70 aircraft, 20 ships on the high seas, and we moved around 3.5 million tons of food last year from one part of the globe to the other to address this problem of hunger. And we work across, just a little problem with the clicker, okay. We work across all of those circumstances that I just mentioned. So we respond to emergencies. So when you see the stories on BBC and CNN and so on, we're there. But we're also in those villages of Guatemala trying to address the chronic situations and people who are in recovery and trying to rebuild livelihoods. And importantly, for my role, we are extremely interested in how we can take any of the new tools, technologies, approaches, business models that are out there, the best of the thinking that's out there, and as fast as possible, incorporate it into our work. I think some people think that, when you're a nonprofit or you're a charity, that somehow means you have to be slower or behind the times, and that is not the case. We have a massive operation. We are a going concern that needs to have the best ideas infused into it, despite the fact that we are international public sector, with apologies to my public sector colleagues in the audience. But we're interested in all of these trends. What's happening in artificial intelligence? What's happening in blockchain? Why we're here today. What's happening in mobile? The projections are that people should have universal connectivity around the globe by about 2022 to 2025. And what does that mean for the way that we change the approach to the people that we're trying to help, and so on. And at the World Food Programme, the way that we've decided to approach this issue of how to take new technologies, new approaches into the organization is by creating an innovation accelerator. We modeled this after a tech startup accelerator. So I'm sure a lot of you from the tech world will be familiar with Y Combinator, Techstars, etc. We actually looked at those models that were going elsewhere in different industries, and we brought them into the World Food Programme, and with the support of the government of Germany and lots of other partners in the private sector and so on, we've created an innovation accelerator that is really meant to support the best ideas by taking ideas that come from inside the organization as well as from external startups and trying to apply them to our problems. And so far, in the year and a half or so that the Innovation Accelerator has been in existence, we've supported 33 projects around the world and across 20 countries. And the accelerator is a place where you can take an early stage idea and you can put it into a boot camp where you do an intense, challenging and coaching and mentoring of that idea to come out with a clear plan. And it's also a place where you can put resources in, small amounts of resources, develop minimum viable products, and have proofs of concept developed. And it's also a place where we're looking to scale up in our innovations that come out of the work. Now, I want to turn to blockchain. And it really starts with one word: trust. And trust, of course, is the theme of what we're talking about here today. If you think about it, trust for our business is extremely important. The people that we're trying to serve, the people they're trying to reach who are hungry, they trust us to get to them with enough and food and assistance and do it quickly enough. And the people that entrust their resources to us, the donors, because we're 100% voluntarily funded, they trust us to deliver that with maximum efficiency, maximum effectiveness. So I'll tell you a little bit about our application of blockchain. And it starts with a part of our work that I haven't stressed until now. But I told you that we move around 3.5 million tons of food in a year. But we actually don't just deliver food. We're now delivering more and more cash-based assistance. And that's because if you take food from one part of the world and you import it into a market where there's a functioning food market, you're going to distort that market, and we don't want to do that. So increasingly, we're giving people some form of cash assistance. It can be cash itself, or it can be some sort of voucher. And increasingly, those programs are digital. So they can be delivered over mobile, they can be delivered over a card-type platform, and some of them are even going completely cardless to a biometric-based system. This is a picture from our program in Jordan, where there's a woman getting her iris scanned to be able to purchase food at a retail grocery store. We delivered almost $1 billion worth of cash last year. That makes us one of the biggest cash providers in some of these markets. And we looked at this value chain of the cash programs, and we said to ourselves, how can we make this better? How can we make it more efficient? How can we make it more trustworthy? Because there's a lot of risks when you move cash around, as you know. And we had a colleague from our finance department, of all places, who came forward and said, let's look at how we can apply blockchain to that payment value chain. And so we started testing. We started working with a company called Datarella. We also had a partnership with Parity. We started developing in a very small, minimum viable product kind of way. We went to a community in Pakistan where we had a small voucher program. We dealt with 100 people, and we built a blockchain, and we said, can we register and record transactions on the blockchain? What does that look like? What's the data we get? Is it effective, or is it accurate enough, and so on? And so we started with 100 people, very simple interface, sending by SMS and so on, and that worked. And so it gave us enough courage to then move to another operation, which is really one of the largest operations we have in cash-based assistance, and that's back in Jordan with Syrian refugees who receive a cash entitlement in the form of a digital voucher every month. And they're able to go to 200 retail points, and they're able to spend that entitlement on a whole basket of food commodities. And they've been doing that in this iris scan program. So we said, okay, let's see if we can replace the back end of that system with a blockchain platform. Now, I'll try to explain how it works. In our conventional programs, we have to take every single beneficiary, every single refugee that is entitled to the assistance that we're providing. We give the list of names to a bank, a local bank that we contract to do this. Then we give a big chunk of money to that bank, and they create wallets for everybody, and then they go through to the retail points, they make their transactions, the bank handles the reconciliation, we get the reports at the end of the month. With our blockchain pilot, we actually don't use the banks for that anymore. We register people directly on the blockchain. The refugees get a registration right on the blockchain. We create virtual wallets for them, They're able to go to the retail points that are able to look, and basically everything functions the way it did before. But what happens is they do the transactions, we track all of the transactions, we monitor the data, and then instead of giving all of the names and all of the money up front to the banks for them to do all the advances, we actually just settle at the end of the month with the retailers. So instead of, in our case, we've got 10,000 people on this pilot. So instead of having 10,000 financial transactions up front of funds transfers, we actually do 200 bulk payments at the end of the month. That is saving us somewhere between 1.5% and 3% on every transaction. And so, okay, well, I guess I should have put this slide up before, but I just described what's on it, so I guess we don't need that anymore. So far in this system, we've transferred over $1 million of value through the pilot with 10,000 people in 140,000 transactions, and so far everything's holding up well. We're very pleased with what we see. In fact, we're so pleased that the trajectory for scale-up we anticipate is that we should have 100,000 people on the blockchain system by the end of the year, and hopefully 500,000, which would basically be every refugee we cover in Jordan with assistance by the first quarter of next year. Now, some of the benefits that we get from that, I already mentioned there's a cost reduction in terms of the bank fees. Now, why is that important? We're not interested in putting banks out of work. What we're interested in is every dollar or Jordanian dinar that we can save in administration fees is another dinar we can put in the hands of people. So that is our driving imperative. It also allows us to have greater transparency. We have the record of all of those transactions, and if something goes wrong along the way, we can have a look at it. So that improves our security as well, because we're not having to advance huge amounts of funds to another third party. And same with the names of the people that we deal with. Privacy is of extreme concern when it comes to refugees. And so we don't like to have to transfer personal information if we don't have to. And so it reduces our need to do that. So, okay. This pilot, we're encouraged by it. And our plan, as I mentioned, is to scale up. We'll look at another scaling up inside Jordan, but also probably one other country from that same region, and then we'll take another region, and we'll plan to expand that not only to our digital voucher programs, but also to our unrestricted cash programs, where we actually just distribute cash to people. They can go to ATMs or retail points and draw cash out. And we're going to experiment with all of those things and see where the advantages lie. And we plan to do that with our partners. The High Commissioner for Refugee is already a partner, and for our other UN or NGO partners who'd like to join us, we're very open to do that. But for me, this is also just the beginning, and I want to leave you with a few thoughts about what could happen next. So I mentioned that we have a large physical supply chain, so we're very interested in looking at how we can apply blockchain to do traceability of our physical assets. I think a number of you in the audience today are working on supply chain issues. It's the same issue for us as any commercial business. We want to reduce our risk, increase the transparency, and reduce costs where we can. But another very interesting application is that when you start to register people on the blockchain for the purpose of food assistance or cash assistance or whatever it is, you have to look at the identity space, because there's 1 billion people in the world that don't have identification. And so this is not really within the mandate of the World Food Program, but we hope to contribute to the ecosystem that starts to develop around digital identification for people. Because it's so important. When you're a small farmer and let's say you're disrupted by conflict, you cross the border, all of your history is lost. If you've lost your documentation, and even if you have it, it may not be valid. But if you've got something that is stored in your digital identity, you can use that history wherever you go. And building on that a bit, This, again, is not within the mandate of the World Food Program as such, but it would help us greatly if somebody were to tackle this problem, which is land tenure or land rights for people whose rights are not secure right now. Now, I grew up in Western Canada. I grew up on a wheat farm. My father had title to our farmland, and if there was a challenge to that, we had a functioning court system that we could go to reconcile the issue. But if you're a small farmer in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia or other parts of the world, often you don't have a reliable record or deed or title to your land. So where do you go when you have a dispute? So having something like a blockchain-based land tenure system, an immutable record of the title that's behind your name, allows you to go to the bank and get a loan, and allows you to interface with other organizations that are able to give you assistance and things. And this would help the whole ecosystem of hunger in a huge way to really secure some of the productive assets in agriculture. Last thing I want to leave you with is a few thoughts that are on my mind. Because as we look at how to go forward in applying blockchain, there's a few problems. The first one is, how do we actually build trust in terms of perceptions of people? Because if I went to our executive board next week, our executive board is made up of 36 member states of the United Nations, representatives of those governments. And I said, hey, board, great news. I have a plan. We're going to invest $20 million, and we're going to apply blockchain organization-wide to underpin all of our operations. They would probably freak out because the technology is not understood. The level of security of the technology is not well understood. I'm not even sure we understand, or I would understand the path to help them get there. So I need help from people like you to help them get there. That's one issue. Second issue is, as these approaches grow, what does the ecosystem look like? What is the ecosystem of a cash transfer program and a physical supply chain tracking system, and then other agency programs, national government safety nets? What does that ecosystem look like, and how does it develop, and how does it get underpinned by a digital identification? And last one, we talk a lot about the power of blockchain in terms of empowering individuals because they can control access to their own data, so self-sovereign data. But when you think about where we are in terms of the people that we're helping, they're a long way from understanding what it would mean to have self-sovereign data management. And so there's got to, we're going to get there, don't get me wrong, and we have to get there. But for me, the question is, how can we get there as fast as possible? So there's an education element to that. There's an element of really just getting the democratized technology out there to people so that they can start using it once they're connected to the internet and they're able to really take advantage of all of that. Because this is an empowering technology, I believe, at the core. It's an empowering technology. And the faster we can get it to people, the faster we can tackle issues like global hunger. Thank you very much.
Thank you.